Hello everyone, my name is Melanie and welcome back to A Slice of Heaven Homestead. Thank you for joining me for the second segment on 10 things to consider before buying a homestead. If you missed the first part to this, I'll go ahead and link this right now. Now, number 6 is hazards. That goes for hurricanes, flood zones, tornadoes, mudslides, blizzards, and wildlife. Now, for us, we did choose a property in Florida, so we will have to deal with hurricanes. However, we did make sure that the property that we were on was not in a flood zone. It wasn't in a regular flood zone, and it wasn't in a 100-year flood zone. We wanted to make sure that whatever we set up on our homestead, what we were, working really hard to do on our homestead, wasn't going to be washed away in a flood. Now, the wildlife, you do need to do a little bit of research as far as the different area that you're looking in. There can be surprising wildlife that you weren't even aware of. I grew up in the Northwest, and I had no idea that there were wild hogs anywhere in the United States. I mean, that just never entered my mind. But that is going to be a reality in the area that we live in, and they can be very dangerous. Now, another one of the hazards for living in Florida is alligators, and my husband may be comfortable with them because he grew up around them. I am not. So when we were looking for our homestead in Florida, I made sure to steer clear of any properties that had big ponds. So you'll just have to do research on the area that you're planning on living in, and make sure that you're prepared for the different hazards that can come along with that area. You're going to have to figure out what it's going to take to prepare your homestead, your livestock, your family for being safe during certain hazard seasons of the year. Okay, so just understand the risks and how you have to prepare. So number 7 is property taxes. Now, it said there's only 2 things that are certain in life: death and taxes. And yeah, that's pretty much it. You will always have to pay taxes. So why not make sure that you are paying the least amount of taxes that you possibly can, right? Now, you have to look into this and research your area, but there are certain states that give tax breaks for agriculture. If you are providing, if you are making money off of your homestead, you can get a substantial tax break from that. Also, and here's another one of the reasons why we decided to homestead in Florida. Florida gives a homestead tax break. So if your primary residence is in Florida, at that one address, you will get a significant tax break. That plus, I believe they also do an agricultural tax break. So those 2 on top of each other is going to be a significant change from the taxes that are on the property right now. They were actually quite high when we were looking into properties. However, we researched it, and the previous owner to that property, it was not his homestead. He never actually lived in the state, so he had to pay the regular high taxes for that property. However, once we actually move on to that property, we will start getting that homestead and agricultural tax break. Now, number 8, rural or urban? Now, you need to decide for yourselves where you want your homestead to be. Now, if you are the type of person that loves to be around other people, but you still want a garden, urban might be the way to go for you. If you're not planning on having any animals, or even a whole lot of animals, the urban homestead might be right for you. But there will be big restrictions on animals. A lot of urban properties, even if they're, even if you have some acreage in the city, you will be limited by those city restrictions. So you probably won't be allowed to have big livestock, cows, sheep, goats. Where we lived in Portland, we were limited to 3 chickens, or 3 goats, or 3 rabbits, but you couldn't have one of each. Don't ask me why. But they do have fairly big restrictions in the urban setting, because you will probably be connected to city water and also to the sewage system, and they need to make sure that there is an adequate amount of runoff for your animals and things like that. Also, within the city limits, you probably won't be allowed to have roosters or pigs, and maybe not even rabbits, just because they can be smelly or noisy or a nuisance. So just be aware of that. So if you are in the city limits, you may be limited on the ability to cut down your trees. In the Portland area, when we lived there, we were not allowed to cut down any trees. Well, not without a permit. However, if you wanted to get a permit, your tree had to be diseased or dying, and you had to replace it with 2 new trees. So be aware of the restrictions that come along with an urban homestead. And now for us, we chose to look in the rural area, outside of the city. One, because the zoning, we wanted to find something with an agricultural zoning, just because the parcels would have to be bigger, and we didn't want to run into problems with subdivisions. We also chose to look outside of the city limits because we did not want to be restricted on the number of trees that we could cut down. There is a fireplace in our house, and we do want to have the ability to heat our house with wood, if anything happens, if the power goes out, or we just want to cut down on our energy cost. In the rural setting, we found that there were not as many animal restrictions, and on our specific property there's no animal restrictions. We can have any animal that we want, just not as much as a commercial farm. So I think we're limited to like 300 chickens, which is fine. We don't want 300 chickens. Number 9 is development. Now, you don't want to buy a homestead and have this dream of yours be ripped apart by an encroaching subdivision. So, before you purchase a homestead, it might be wise to go into your local county office and figure out what their 5, 10, or 15-year plan is for the city around you. So when you find your piece of property, you want to check and see what the surrounding area is like. So you want to take a look at the condition of the roads surrounding the property that you're looking into. Are they dirt roads? Are there muddy places where it's going to flood during certain times of the year and you won't be able to get off of your property? Also, you want to be aware of the accessibility of your property. Are fire trucks and ambulances going to be able to get out to your property in case of an emergency, or is it just inaccessible? I would suggest steering away from the inaccessible properties, just because if a fire does break out, you may lose everything by the time a fire truck can even get to you. So be aware of how accessible your property is as far as that, as far as emergency vehicles go. Also, how close to the city is it, and how far away. So for us, we didn't want to be too close to the city, but we also didn't want to be too far away. We wanted to have that emergency access to our property. However, we wanted to be far enough away from the city that there wasn't going to be any threats of subdivisions popping up around us. And last but not least, number 10, who are your neighbors? It's very important for you to be aware of who your neighbors are. Now, you don't have to know who your neighbors are on a first name basis and get to know every aspect of their lives. However, it's important for you to look into, are they pig farmers or cattle farmers? Some people can't stand that smell, and we honestly looked into a couple different homesteads that were fairly close to cattle farms and pig farms, and I grew up in the city, and I don't know if I could live with that smell. So we steered clear of those. Also, I made sure to look on Google, because we had to purchase our homestead from all the way on the other side of the world. So we were not able to actually go onto the property that we were looking at and check out our neighbors there. So we had to rely on Google Maps. Now, there were quite a few different properties that, just looking on Google Maps, the property was surrounded by junk hoarders. Just piles and piles of trash and broken down cars and, terrible looking boats and things like that. And we had to steer clear of those kind of properties as well. Are your neighbors party people? This is something that I had never even considered before, but we had a house in Portland, and we had a nice neighbor. He was nice, but he was a party person, and he would throw parties until 2, 3, 4 in the morning. And we lived on less than 1/6 of an acre in Portland, so his yard was right by our windows, and yeah. If that's not something that you want to deal with, as far as noise is concerned, then you might want to steer clear of neighbors who are right up against your property. So if you own 5-10 acres and your house is right in the middle and their house is right in the middle of their property, it probably won't be a problem. However, if your neighbors have property right next to your property line and so is your house, you kind of want to see what kind of noises you're going to have to deal with. So I know that for most of us, when we are looking into and purchasing a homestead, we have an idea in our minds that this will be our forever homestead. And hopefully it will be. That's what we're hoping for. But we are also prepared for the reality that we may at some time have to sell our homestead. Nobody knows what the future holds. 20 years from now, there may be subdivisions around our area, and we may have our land rights voted down. We may eventually be limited on the animals that we can have on our homestead. Nobody knows what the future is going to hold. And so going into purchasing a homestead, we are aware of the fact that we may eventually have to sell the property. So that is another huge reason to research who your neighbors are. A lot of those neighbors, junk hoarders, pig farmers, things like that, they can bring your property value down. And if you have to sell your homestead, you want to get as much out of that deal as you possibly can. So make sure you're aware of who your neighbors are. Also, if you find a piece of property that you just absolutely fall in love with, but there are subdivisions just down the road, be aware of the zoning, the different zoning of the properties around you, because zoning can change over time. And if somebody buys a property around you and decides to parcel it off and build a subdivision, those people in the subdivision can eventually change the laws on your property. This happened in the neighborhood that my husband grew up in. He grew up in farm country. He had neighbors with just acres and acres of dairy farm. And somebody bought up a big tract of farmland and decided to get the zoning changed on it. And he started building subdivisions all around that farmland. Well, unfortunately, you know, the more houses that are in a subdivision in an area, the more votes that is for that area. And the people in the subdivision did not like the smell of the dairy farm right next door. And even though this dairy farm had been in this family for 100 years, the people in the subdivision ended up being able to change the laws and voted out that dairy farm. So just be aware, if you are too close to subdivisions or certain zoning, it may be a factor in you having to sell your homestead eventually. So guys, I know I have given you an earful of things to consider before buying your homestead. And I hope that all this information helps somebody out there. You know, there may have been things on this list that you never thought about. And with that, I'm going to say spread a little kindness and encourage one another today. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. And if you felt that this list was helpful, please help us out by sharing this video. Until next time, we hope you find your slice of heaven too.